Oh, honey, if someone had told me just 6 months ago that my own flesh and blood, my precious daughter, would be living in a mansion bigger than anything I'd ever laid eyes on, and that I, her mother, would be standing on the wrong side of its imposing gate, well, I would have laughed them right out of my little kitchen. But here I am, Dorothy Mae Henderson, 72 years young with a heart heavy as an anvil, finally ready to share the true story of how I visited my millionaire daughter just to say hello, and what happened when well, you'll see. It's a story about family, about money, and about how sometimes the people you think you know best can become perfect strangers overnight. Get ready, because this isn't just my story. It could be anyone's. It all started with a postcard, plain as day, arriving in my mailbox on a Tuesday morning, postmarked from some fancy California zip code I barely recognized. Not a call, mind you, not an email, but a picture of a palm tree and a short, almost clipped message from my daughter, Clara. Mom, bought a new place. Big. Come visit sometime. Love, see, big? That was an understatement, I'd soon discover. For 25 years, Clara had been my sunshine, my only child. After her father, bless his soul, passed when she was just 14, it was just us against the world. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, cleaning houses, waitressing down at the diner, anything to make sure she had what she needed. She was a bright girl, always had her nose in a book, always dreaming bigger than our small town could hold. And I encouraged it every step of the way. Go on, sweetheart, I'd always say. Reach for the stars. Don't ever let anyone tell you you can't. And she did. Went off to college on a scholarship, then moved to California, chasing some kind of tech dream. We talked, or rather, she called sporadically at first, then less and less. Holidays were a quick phone call, birthdays a card with a gift certificate. Distant, but I understood. She was building her life. Or so I thought. The postcard stirred something in me, a mix of pride and a gnawing ache. Pride, because my girl had clearly made it. And ache, because it felt like a message from another world, one I didn't belong to. Still, she was my daughter. My heart yearned to see her, to hug her, to finally understand this new life she'd built. So, after a week of deliberating, looking at the chipped paint on my own humble little house, I decided I'd go. I cashed in some of my meager savings, the little bit I'd set aside for a rainy day, or perhaps my own funeral, and booked a one-way bus ticket to California. Just to say hello, I told my neighbor Agnes, who raised an eyebrow but wished me well. Just to see my girl. Oh, how naive I was. The journey felt endless. 3 days and 2 nights on that Greyhound, watching America blur outside the window, each mile taking me further from the familiar and closer to, what exactly? Hope? Fear? By the time I finally stepped off that bus in a sun-drenched, palm tree-lined city, my joints ached. My old Samsonite suitcase felt heavier than a bag of bricks. And my dress, my best floral print, felt sticky and wrinkled. But my spirit was high. I was going to see Clara. My Clara. I found the address on the postcard written in elegant cursive. It led me to a part of town I'd only ever seen in movies. Manicured lawns, towering hedges, and houses that looked more like private resorts than homes. My heart started to beat a little faster, a nervous flutter. This was it. This was Clara's world now. When I finally stood before the address, my jaw nearly hit the perfectly paved driveway. It wasn't just big. It was colossal. A sprawling modern edifice of glass and stone, nestled behind a wrought iron gate that looked like it belonged to a king. This was my daughter's new place? I gripped the strap of my purse, suddenly feeling terribly out of place in my sensible shoes and faded dress. A knot formed in my stomach. I pressed the intercom button, my finger trembling slightly. A polite, disembodied voice asked, "Yes? May I help you?" "It's Dorothy Henderson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm Clara's mother. "I've come to visit." There was a pause, a long, agonizing silence on the other end. I could practically hear the gears turning, the confusion. Then the voice returned, sounding a little less polite, a little more guarded. "One moment, please. Another wait." The California sun beat down on me, but I felt a chill. What was happening? Why the delay? Was she busy? Had I caught her at a bad time? My mind raced through 1,000 excuses, each one trying to quell the growing unease. Finally, the gate slowly, majestically, began to swing open. My breath hitched. This was it? I was going to see my girl. I walked up the long, winding driveway, past a perfectly sculpted fountain, past roses in bloom that smelled sweeter than any I'd ever grown in my own garden. My eyes scanned the front of the house, looking for a sign of her, a movement in a window. Nothing. The front door, a grand dark wood affair, opened just as I reached it. But it wasn't Clara who stood there. It was a young woman in a crisp uniform, her expression polite but unsmiling. "Mrs. Henderson?" she asked. "Please come in." I stepped inside, into an entryway that was larger than my entire living room, all polished marble and soaring ceilings. It smelled of expensive flowers and something subtly antiseptic, not like home. "Clara?" I asked, my voice a little small in the vast space. "Ms. Albright will be with you shortly," the woman said, leading me to a sitting room furnished with sleek, minimalist furniture that looked beautiful but utterly uninviting. "Please, make yourself comfortable." I sat on a pristine white sofa that felt cold and firm. My suitcase, still in my hand, suddenly felt like a crude intrusion. Where was Clara? Why wasn't she greeting me? A prickle of disappointment, sharp and unexpected, started to spread through me. Had I made a mistake coming here? After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 minutes, Clara finally appeared. And oh, how she had changed. Gone was the bright-eyed girl with dirt on her knees and a permanent smudge of ink on her finger. This woman was a vision in a tailored silk pantsuit, her hair perfectly coiffed, a diamond necklace glinting at her throat. She looked utterly magnificent, utterly successful, and utterly unfamiliar. "Mom," she said, her voice cool, lacking the warmth I remembered, the familiar lilt. She didn't rush to hug me. She simply stood a few feet away, her hands clasped in front of her. "What a surprise! Surprise!" My heart sank a little further. "Well, darling, you sent me a postcard. I thought I'd come visit, see your new place." I tried to inject some cheer into my voice, but it sounded hollow, even to my own ears. "Yes, well," she said, glancing around the immaculate room as if seeing it for the first time. "It is new." She still hadn't moved. She hadn't smiled. My arms, which had been half raised for an embrace, slowly fell back to my sides. I just wanted to say hello," I repeated, feeling a foolish blush creep up my neck. "See how you're doing." Clara finally took a step closer, but it wasn't for a hug. She reached out, not to me, but to my suitcase, and with a delicate two-fingered grip, nudged it ever so slightly away from the pristine white rug. "You should have called, Mom. We could have made arrangements." "Arrangements?" I stared at her, utterly bewildered. I was her mother. What arrangements did I need? My mind raced back to all the times she'd showed up on my doorstep unannounced, hungry, tired, needing a shoulder to cry on. "I never asked for arrangements. My door was always open. I thought it would be a nice surprise," I ventured, trying to bridge the chasm that seemed to have opened between us. Clara let out a small, humorless laugh. "Surprise it is, then." She finally met my gaze, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of the old Clara, a glimpse of the girl I knew. But it vanished quickly, replaced by a polished, impenetrable mask. "Well, since you're here, I suppose you'll need somewhere to stay." She turned to the uniformed woman who had greeted me. "Marie, please show my mother to the guest house, and have her bags taken there. Guest house. Not a spare bedroom. Not a hug. Not even a warm cup of tea. Just the guest house." I froze for a second, the words echoing in the vast, cold space. The message was clear, chillingly so. I was a guest, an unexpected one, to be accommodated, not welcomed home. My heart, already bruised, tightened into a painful knot. This wasn't the reunion I dreamed of, not by a long shot. This was something else entirely, something cold, something distant. Something I couldn't yet put my finger on, but it tasted like a betrayal. And it was only just beginning. I followed Marie, my old suitcase now feeling like a burden, not a companion, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life, stepping into this gilded cage of a home. I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this visit wasn't going to be just a simple hello. It was going to be a confrontation with a truth I wasn't prepared for. The guest house, as Clara called it, was more beautiful and more lonely than any place I'd ever been. It was a miniature version of the main house, a dollhouse of marble and glass, with a bed so big I felt lost in it, and a bathroom that glittered under the recessed lights. But it was cold, not just the tile under my bare feet, but the air itself. It had the sterile, impersonal feeling of a five-star hotel room, a place where no one had ever truly lived, or laughed, or cried. There were no photographs on the walls, no scuff marks on the floor, no well-worn books on the nightstand. There was just space, empty, echoing space. For 2 days, that space was my entire world. Marie, the quiet housekeeper, would bring me my meals on a tray. Perfectly arranged salads, exquisitely cooked fish, tiny little desserts in crystal bowls. Food for a stranger, not for a mother. I'd eat alone, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at a swimming pool that shimmered, untouched, under the relentless California sun. I tried calling Clara on the house phone, but it always went to her voicemail. I'd see her sometimes, a fleeting silhouette in the window of the main house, or a flash of a luxury car pulling out of the driveway. She was a ghost in her own home, and I was the ghost in hers. My heart ached with a physical pain. This wasn't just neglect. It felt like a deliberate erasure, as if she'd brought me all this way just to show me the life I would never be a part of. The second evening, I couldn't bear the silence any longer. I found a small bag of flour in the kitchenette and decided to bake her favorite cookies, the soft, chewy oatmeal raisin ones I used to make for her after school. The smell, warm and cinnamon sweet, filled the cold little house, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt like home. I arranged them on a plate, my hands trembling a little, and walked the stone path to the main house. It was just after 8 p.m. Surely she'd be home. I knocked on the grand front door. After a moment, it was opened not by Clara, but by a man I'd never seen before. He was handsome, in a severe sort of way, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my Social Security check for a year. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but firm, the same tone the intercom had used. I'm Dorothy." "Clara's mother," I stammered, holding up the plate of cookies like a peace offering. "I just baked these for her." The man's eyes flickered down to the cookies, then back to my face, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. "Clara is in a meeting," he said coolly. "She can't be disturbed." "A meeting? At this hour?" From behind him, I could hear the faint sound of laughter and music. It didn't sound like any meeting I'd ever heard of. "Oh," I said, my voice small. "Well, could you please give these to her?" He took the plate from me, his fingers careful not to touch mine. "I'll see that she gets them," he said. And then, before I could say another word, he gently but firmly closed the door in my face. The click of the lock echoed in the quiet evening. I stood there on the porch, my hands empty, the warm, hopeful smell of cinnamon now seeming like a cruel joke. I was being managed, handled, kept at a distance like an inconvenient problem. That night, something inside me shifted. The hurt, which had been a dull, throbbing ache, began to sharpen into something else, anger, and a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't some stranger to be shooed away from the door. I was her mother. I had rocked her to sleep, wiped her tears, and worked my fingers to the bone for her dreams. This magnificent cold life she had built, where had it come from? It wasn't just from a good tech job, I knew that much. This level of wealth felt different, sudden, and secretive. The polite dismissals, the constant meetings, the way she couldn't even look me in the eye. It wasn't just a daughter who'd grown distant. It was a daughter who was hiding something. I, Dorothy Mae Henderson, was done being a victim. I was going to find out what it was. My chance came the very next day. Clara and the severe-looking man, her husband, business partner, left in the morning. I watched their car disappear down the long driveway. Marie, the housekeeper, was busy in the gardens out back. The main house was silent, a sleeping giant. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my feet were steady. I walked out of my glass and steel cage and right up to that grand front door. I twisted the handle, unlocked. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like a sign. I slipped inside. The house was even more intimidating when it was empty. My sensible, soft-soled shoes made no sound on the marble floors. I drifted from room to room, feeling like an intruder in my own daughter's life. Everything was perfect, sterile, and impersonal. It was a showroom, not a home. Then I saw a door, slightly ajar, at the end of a long hallway. It led into a study. Clara's study? I knew it instantly. It was the only room that felt even remotely lived in. Books lined the walls, not classics, but thick volumes on finance, corporate law, and market strategy. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface clear except for a sleek laptop and a single framed photograph. My legs carried me over to it. I picked it up. It was a picture of Clara, smiling, standing next to that severe-looking man. An inscription at the bottom read, "Clara and Richard, Partnership Gala 2023. So that was his name. Richard, her partner. Not her husband. I put the photo down, a strange sense of disappointment washing over me. But that wasn't what I was here for. I scanned the room, my eyes searching for, I didn't even know what. A letter, a diary. Then I saw it. Tucked away on a bottom shelf, almost hidden behind a row of financial binders, was something that didn't belong. It was old, worn, and deeply familiar. It was my late husband's briefcase. I froze. A wave of dizziness washed over me, so strong I had to grip the edge of the desk. Arthur's briefcase. He had it with him the day of the accident, the terrible car crash that took him from us. The police told me it was destroyed in the fire, that nothing was salvageable. I'd mourned its loss along with everything else, because inside that worn leather case were his dreams. Arthur was an inventor, a dreamer, not a businessman, but a creator. He was always tinkering, sketching, coming up with ideas he believed would change the world. His final project, the one he was most excited about, he called Aura Connect. It was some kind of networking system way ahead of its time. He said it would connect people in a way no one had ever imagined. I never fully understood the technical side of it, but I understood the passion in his eyes when he spoke of it. My hands shook as I pulled the heavy case from the shelf. The latch was stiff, but it sprung open with a familiar click. The scent of old paper and leather, my husband's scent, wafted up to me, and tears sprang to my eyes. It was all there. His notebooks, filled with his elegant looping handwriting, his technical drawings, so precise and detailed. And there on the very top was the business proposal. The cover page read, Aura Connect, a proposal for a new era of digital empathy. By Arthur Henderson. My blood ran cold. I sank into the expensive leather chair behind the desk, the documents spread out before me. I read for what felt like hours, my mind struggling to piece it all together. The concepts, the architecture, the very name of the company. It was all there. It was Arthur's soul on paper. Then my eyes fell on a stack of sleek modern brochures on the corner of the desk, printed on glossy paper. I picked one up. The company's logo was a stylized letter A inside a glowing circle. And the name, printed in bold corporate font, made the world stop spinning. Auralink Global.Aura Connect. Auralink. It was his. It was all his. His dream, his work, his genius. And my daughter, my own flesh and blood, had built her empire on her dead father's legacy without ever mentioning his name. She hadn't just built on his dream. She had stolen it, repackaged it, and claimed it as her own. The postcard, the distance, the coldness, the guest house, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. She wasn't hiding a secret. She was the secret. She was a fraud. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the brochure in my hand, my husband's ghost whispering in my ear. But I knew what I had to do. I carefully placed Arthur's most important notebooks and the original proposal back into the briefcase. I closed it, the click of the latch sounding like a gavel in the silent room. I walked out of that study, out of that cold, empty mansion, and back to my guest house, carrying the truth in that old leather case. That evening, I didn't wait for her to come to me. When I saw her car pull into the driveway, I walked out to meet her. She got out of the car, looking surprised and a little annoyed to see me standing there. Richard was with her. "Mom," she said, her voice tight. "Is something wrong?" I didn't answer. I just held up the briefcase. "I believe this belongs to me," I said, my voice shaking but clear. Clara's face went white. She stared at the briefcase as if it were a snake poised to strike. For the first time since I'd arrived, her polished mask cracked, and I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes. Richard looked from me to Clara, his expression hardening. "Where did you get that?" Clara whispered, her voice a raw nerve. "From your study," I said simply. "From where you've kept it hidden all these years." Along with the truth, the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The California sun began to set, casting long, menacing shadows across the perfect lawn. Clara looked at me, her eyes no longer distant, but filled with a cold fury I had never seen before. It was the look of a cornered animal. "You had no right," she hissed, taking a step toward me. And in that moment, I knew this was more than a family squabble. This was a battle for my husband's memory, and I was not going to lose. The air in that perfect manicured driveway grew thick and heavy, charged with all the years of unspoken words between us. Clara's face, usually so composed, was a storm of conflicting emotions: shock, fear, and a terrifying cold rage. Richard stepped forward, placing a protective hand on her arm. "Clara, what is this? Who is this woman?" Clara flinched, not at his question, but at the briefcase in my hands. "She's my mother," she said through gritted teeth, the words sounding like an accusation. Then her eyes locked onto mine, hard as diamonds. "And she's a thief. A thief?" The accusation hung in the air, so absurd, so cruel, it stole the breath from my lungs. "I am no thief, Clara," I said, my voice trembling but gaining strength with every word. "I am your father's wife. And this was his life's work, his dream, Aura Connect." At the mention of the name, Richard's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He knew. Of course he knew. He looked at Clara, a silent question passing between them. Clara let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "His dream?" She spat, the word dripping with condescension. "Mom, you have no idea what you're talking about. Dad had notebooks full of doodles, of impossible fantasies. He was a dreamer, not a doer. He never would have. He couldn't have built this." She gestured around her at the palatial estate, at the gleaming car, at the empire of glass and stone. "I did this. I took his scribbles and I made them into something real." It was the most twisted justification I had ever heard. She wasn't just admitting it. She was proud of it. She saw her father's genius not as a gift to be honored, but as raw material to be exploited. "You stole his legacy, Clara," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You built this house on his grave. Enough." Richard stepped between us, his voice a low growl. "Mrs. Henderson, you are trespassing. Clara has been more than generous, putting you up in the guest house. I suggest you take your souvenirs," he said, gesturing to the briefcase with disgust, "and leave quietly." Generous? I looked past him at my daughter, my heart breaking all over again. I saw a stranger, a woman so blinded by wealth and ambition that she had erased her own past, her own father. "I don't want your generosity, Clara. I don't want your money. I want you to tell the truth. I want you to give your father the credit he deserves." Clara's face hardened into a mask of pure ice. "The car will be here to take you to the airport at 9 a.m. tomorrow," she said, her voice flat and final. "Be ready, and if you ever try to contact me or spread these delusional stories, Richard's lawyers will make you regret it for the rest of your very short life." And with that, she turned her back on me. She and Richard walked away, up the stone path to their grand front door, leaving me standing alone in the deepening twilight, clutching my husband's briefcase to my chest. The door closed with a soft final click. I was dismissed, disowned, erased. That night, in the cold, silent guest house, I did not cry. The time for tears was over. The hurt had burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unyielding steel. She thought she could throw me away like an old piece of furniture. She thought her money and her lawyers made her invincible. But she had forgotten one thing. I was Arthur Henderson's wife. I was made of stronger stuff than she knew. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at the little desk and opened the briefcase, spreading Arthur's papers out under the lamplight. I read his words, traced his drawings with my finger, and let his passion, his hope, his unwavering belief in a better world fill me up. And that's when I saw it, tucked into the flap of an old notebook, a small, unassuming business card. On it was printed, "David Chen, Eskuner, Patent and Intellectual Property Law." And in the margin, in Arthur's handwriting, was a note. "Spoke with David, sharp young man. Thinks Aura Connect has real potential. June 14th, 1999. A spark of hope, fierce and bright, ignited in my chest. The next morning, when the black car arrived at precisely 9 a.m., I was waiting. But I didn't get in. I told the driver I had made other arrangements. I used the last bit of cash I had in my purse to take a taxi not to the airport, but to a run-down part of the city, to the address on that old business card. The building was gone, replaced by a coffee shop. For a moment, my heart sank. But I wasn't giving up. I asked the young barista if she knew of a lawyer named David Chen. She shook her head, but an older man sitting at a table overheard me. "David Chen?" he said. "Sure. He moved his practice uptown years ago. Big shot patent lawyer now." He gave me the new address. It took me the rest of the day and 2 bus transfers, but I found it. A sleek, high-rise office building with a directory of important-sounding names in the lobby. My heart pounded as I rode the elevator up to the 34th floor. I must have looked a sight. An old woman in a wrinkled floral dress, clutching a battered briefcase, walking into a law firm that smelled of money and success. The receptionist looked at me over her glasses, her expression skeptical. "May I help you?" "I need to see Mr. David Chen," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I don't have an appointment, but please, tell him Dorothy Henderson is here. Arthur Henderson's wife." She sighed, but she picked up the phone. A few moments later, a man appeared. He wasn't a young man anymore. He was in his late 50s, with kind eyes and streaks of gray at his temples. He looked at me, then at the briefcase in my hands, and a flicker of recognition, of memory, crossed his face. "Mrs. Henderson?" he said, his voice soft with disbelief. "My goodness. Please come in." In his office, overlooking the entire city, I told him everything. I opened the briefcase and laid out Arthur's notebooks, his drawings, his proposal. David Chen listened, his expression growing more intent, more serious with every word I spoke. He handled the old papers with a reverence that brought tears to my eyes. He remembered my Arthur. He remembered the brilliant, passionate inventor who had walked into his office all those years ago. "This is extraordinary," he said, looking at the dated, witnessed entries in the notebooks. "This is a perfect chain of evidence. Her company, Oralink, it's built entirely on this." He looked at me, his kind eyes now filled with a righteous fire. "They think they can bury this. They think they can bury you. They're wrong." He leaned forward. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to take your case, and we are going to win." The months that followed were a blur of legal papers and meetings. Clara's lawyers were exactly as ruthless as she had promised. They tried to paint me as a senile, greedy old woman. They called my husband an amateur, a failed dreamer. They offered me money, a lot of money, to sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear. Every offer felt like another slap in the face. And every time I looked at David and said, "No, this was never about the money. It was about the truth." The truth, it turns out, is a powerful thing. Armed with Arthur's meticulous records, David filed a lawsuit that sent shockwaves through the tech world. The story was just too compelling to ignore. The billionaire CEO and the stolen legacy of her dead father. The press got a hold of it. The name Arthur Henderson started appearing in headlines. His photo, a handsome, smiling man full of dreams, was suddenly everywhere. The carefully crafted image of Clara, the self-made genius, began to crumble. She never had to face me in court. The risk to her company, to her reputation, was too great. On the advice of her lawyers, just weeks before the trial was set to begin, she folded. She settled. The settlement was, by any measure, enormous. But the money meant nothing to me compared to the other terms of the agreement. Clara had to issue a public, formal acknowledgement that Arthur Henderson was the original inventor of the core technology that formed the basis of Oralink Global. She had to retroactively name him as a co-founder of the company. And most importantly to me, she had to fund the establishment of the Arthur Henderson Foundation for Young Innovators, a multi-million-dollar endowment to provide grants to bright, young dreamers who, like my Arthur, had brilliant ideas but lacked the resources to make them real. His name was cleared. His legacy was restored. That was my victory. I never saw Clara again. I have no idea if she felt remorse or just the sting of defeat. Perhaps it's better that I don't know. I returned to my small town, to my little house with the chipped paint. But I wasn't the same woman who had left. I used the settlement money to create a new life, not of luxury, but of purpose. I now sit on the board of my husband's foundation. I get to read the applications from young people all over the country, their minds buzzing with ideas, their hearts full of the same fire my Arthur had. I help them get their start. In their bright, hopeful faces, I see my husband's spirit, alive and well. I have found a new family, a family of dreamers. And looking back on it all, I realize that some things are worth more than any mansion, more than any fortune. Integrity, honor, love, those are the true treasures. My daughter chose a path of wealth, but she lost her soul along the way. I was left with my husband's old briefcase, but inside it, I found my strength, my purpose, and the greatest inheritance of all, his beautiful, unbreakable spirit. The truth doesn't always come easy, honey, and sometimes you have to walk through the fire to find it. But it's always, always worth fighting for. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It means the world to me to be able to share it. If you've ever had to fight for what you believe in, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear more true stories from an old granny who's seen a thing or two, please do subscribe to the channel. You take care now.